This podcast is brought to you by the Islamic Center and NYU. For more information, visit our website at www.icnyu.org.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له. ونشهد أن سيدنا مولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله. In the name of Allah, the gracious, the merciful, all praise is due to Allah, the Lord of the universe, the master of the day of judgment. I bear witness and testimony to the oneness of Allah, to His magnificence, His omnipotence, His might, His glory, to His being the creator and sustainer of all things, the giver of life, the guider of hearts, the master of the day of judgment. And I bear witness to the fact that Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam is His servant and final messenger. May the peace and blessing of Allah be upon him and upon all those who choose to tread in his path until the last day. It is said that towards the end of Ramadan, the Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam would regularly engage in a practice known as the i'tikaf, secluding himself to nothing other than the masjid. And as we ready and prep ourselves for the coming month of Ramadan, within this month of Sha'ban, may Allah make it a means of blessing for us and enable us to meet that blessed month of Ramadan in as best of a state as possible. This is a key practice within the prophetic tradition that we want to start to reflect upon. The word i'tikaf itself refers to a specific practice that the Prophet engaged in, where he would separate himself from the Meccan society in which he lived and seclude himself to the masjid for the final 10 days and nights of the month of Ramadan. It said that in the last year of his life, he did 20. There's some narrations that say that at times he might have missed some because of illness, and he even made those up in other months. But it's a practice that he was regularly engaged in. And that seeking of solitude wasn't something that he and the companions engaged in solely in the month of Ramadan. That you have narrations in our tradition that would say that there would be times when they would enter into the masjid, even if just for a few hours, some moments. And they would sit the way that we are seated, but they would sit with the intention of it being an i'tikaf for them. And some would use this as a basis of being able to say that if you're not able to do the full 10, but you can do a portion of it, you still should. And beyond that generation, you see within every generation, even before he became a prophet, and prophets before him, they would have this as a regular practice. Musa alayhi salam, he separates himself from the Bani Israel for 40 days. Maryam, peace be upon her, she seeks seclusion in the temple at a time when let alone women were not doing this, nobody was doing it. Our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he is seeking solitude in places like the cave of Hira, in places where nobody else would be, but they would by chance go across and they would find him there all by himself. It's in these spaces where big things also happen. When Moses, peace be upon him, finds that solitude, he speaks to Allah. Maryam, peace be upon her, when she is in her seclusion, in her solitude, the gifts of fruits come to her from just Allah alone. The Prophet, in his solitude, becomes now recipient of the first revelation That's the nature of what is possible when you're able to do it with regularity. I want you to think about this in a few different frames. In the prism of modernity, we have so much that is in advancement. It's undeniable. You can see that interconnectivity exists in a mode that no one could have even imagined years ago. The realities of how we can communicate through technological apparatus, the innovation of scientific advancement, and so much more. In the prism of modernity, there also is gaps that exist. And one of the most crucial gaps that impacts each of us and so many in the world's existence right now is the diminishing of places of stillness and reflection. I want you to think as an individual, where do you go to rest? Where do you go to just disconnect? Where do you go where you don't stare at your phone in the midst of anything? You don't respond to every vibration and every notification. Where do you go where you're not away from people, but you can be away from distractions? Spaces that allow for you to utilize the akal that was given to you to simply now engage in the practice of contemplation, reflection. You want to think about how we differ from the rest of creation. The rest of creation necessitates compulsive action in order for them to exist. And most creatures in creation also are in a space where you don't necessarily see them in isolation, other than when we as humans live in ways other than we're supposed to. So it's always a school of fish. It's always a flock of birds. It's always a herd of cattle. But you and I, we exist individually at times. And the way that a creature in creation necessitates compulsive action in order to exist, to do what it does, you and I uniquely in creation are qualified not just as humans, but human beings. Because we can be human simply by just being. There's a different recognition of what we're endowed with individually. And in the prism of modernity, when you live in a consumer-based society that is constantly telling you to feed the physical, feed the physical, feed the physical, it has you run on default settings, chasing after something day in and day out, day in and day out. You don't take moments to stop and deliberately breathe. You don't take moments to stop and deliberately rest, to reflect, to contemplate. And what's getting stifled is not growth in all of its forms, but really the only aspect that you and I remain to have evolution in. And that's an ever-evolving potential in our consciousness. I want you to just think for a moment. When was the last time you paused to just reflect? When was the last time you built into your strategy for the coming week, the coming month, an opportunity to just be in a place of contemplation? If that strategy is not something that's coming willfully, how do you know that the direction that you're going in is a direction that is going to bear you an end point where you in fact believe you need to be in order for you to have entry point to the best of places in the world beyond this one? We have everybody just move up and come in close. And this is what they were doing with regularity throughout the months. But in Ramadan in particular, the i'tikaf was something that the Prophet ﷺ did not leave behind. The word itself, i'tikaf, it is derived from the Arabic root ayn kaf fa, which denotes being committed to something. You're in a place now where that seclusion in that masjid, is heavily rooted now to what we fundamentally understand Ramadan to be about, you are that much more strategic about what it is that you are consuming throughout the course of your Ramadan day. Not just about the abandonment of food and drink, but so much more. Everything that's going into you now is devoid of negativity. You're sitting in the masjid in i'tikaf, you're not hearing anybody gossip and curse. You're sitting in the masjid in i'tikaf, you're not hearing anybody tell you why it is that you are inadequate in some way. You're hearing verses recited that are speaking to you about your beauty, the inherent nature of your goodness, what you can aspire towards in terms of being somebody who's not afraid to dream. You're hearing words that are talking to you about a God that believes in you more than you believe in yourself. A God that is looking for a reason to accept from you and not push you away. A religion that's not merely an identity variable, but something that you live and you practice, you embody within a connection to a tradition that transcends 14 lived centuries of practice. You're around people who are going to uplift because they too have hearts that are now not being impacted by so much of the negative that exists. And it's in Ramadan, so sufidat the shayateen, they're changed. When I was a freshman at NYU, Ramadan was around Christmas time. A lot of you were maybe not even born at that point, which is really, really crazy to think about. And it was the first time I ever made i'tikaf in my life. I was 18 years old. I couldn't do the full 10 nights because of my final exam schedule. But the minute my exam finished, I got on a train with a bag from my dorm, went to a masjid that I used to go to growing up in central New Jersey, and I stayed there for the next 6.5 days and nights, the last in Ramadan. The masjid was filled with a lot of younger people because of the holiday time. What we engaged in was so much that you can imagine prayers and Quran recitation, but it was also about what we were not engaging in. I didn't hear anybody fight in those nights. Not one person raised their voices in a way that was antagonistic or filled with retributive anger. Right? Maulana Rumi, he says, raise your words, not your voices. It is the rain that makes the flowers grow, not the thunder. I didn't hear anybody lie. And I didn't have anybody to lie to or gossip with as well. I wasn't in a place where what I was consuming was now simply not just about my food and my drink, but the day-to-day consumption. And I left the masjid and I walked out its front door, and the world just looks so different, man. I can still picture what that same parking lot was that I used to drive in day after day after day when I was a teenager trying to figure out what religion meant to me. But what I remember even more starkly is the first argument that I heard thereafter, and the way that it just struck my heart, like somebody was literally stabbing me, because I hadn't heard that kind of noise for days. My dua as I left the masjid was that, Ya Allah, let my heart continue to quake when I hear things like this. I don't want to lose that. I don't want to become desensitized to a place where there's not something that causes me to tremble and shudder when I hear somebody mistreating somebody else. Or God forbid, it's my own voice that I hear pushing down someone instead of bringing them up. I want you to think about this in anticipation, because there are students that go to this school and other schools that I know are not going to be able to do 10 days and nights of i'tikaf. There are professionals who are part of our community that work remotely, they go to offices, they also will not be able to do a full 10 days or 10 nights. But a lot of them are going to plan. And they're going to say, the weekend is upon me. There's no place else I'm going to be other than seeking that solitude. Saturday is there, and rather than thinking about what I cannot accomplish, I'm going to make sure that I find a space from now where I'm able to engage in that practice. There's different opinions on where it must be done. Everyone says the masjid should be the case. Some exceptions are made in terms of being able to do it in your home. There's 200 mosques in New York City. Find one from now. But you don't have to get along with everybody. You're not going there to be there with them. You're going to be with Allah. Be the person that turns to your friend and says, hey, should we go do this? Even if it's just from the evening till Fajr, even if it's just for a few hours, even if it's just for some moments. In the practice of a sunnah, the nawafil, the idea is that if you can do a portion of it, you still do a portion of it. You break out of the mindset that says that somehow there's not benefit in just reading one verse of the Quran. Somebody else can read a whole juz. That's fine. You can read one verse, read a verse. You're not in competition with anybody else. The one that you are today is just in a pursuit of meeting who you can be tomorrow. You got to start someplace. You want to just taste it. You want to feel what it's like to be in that kind of space. Or what it is that you're taking in is absent of what is negative and filled with what is positive, real barakah. In the prism of modernity, what we also deal with on a consumption level is not just now food and drink, but you can go through an entire day and take in more imagery, more sound, consumption through your other organs of sensory perception. In a day, in a week, more so than in comparison to what somebody might have done in their whole life decades ago. And the idea of lowering your gaze is not something that should be limited to a simplistic understanding of gender relations that has us become standoffish to each other as brothers and sisters. You want to be able to elevate the discourse and mature yourself to a place that recognizes that our book teaches us to be supporters of one another. You can't do that if what you understand this to be is something that is just at its most base reductive understanding. You lower your gaze in those instances because now as you consume imagery, it's staying with you. When you stand in prayer, something that you did not see is not going to just pop into your head. Something that you never heard is not going to somehow just on its own formulate itself into your psyche. The only things that you can look at in retrospect are the things that you inspected in the first place. And so the idea of being conscious of what it is that you gaze upon is so that just like you don't want to overeat through your mouth to the point that it impacts your physical being in a way that holds you back from your potential growth, you also want to be conscious of what it is that you're consuming from the eyes that you see with, the ears that you hear with, the hands that you touch with. And when you're in a place of solitude, you're able to now not be away from people, but you're able to be away from distractions. And you can start to think objectively. And you can start to strategize, that says, what are the things that are pulling me towards things that I'm really wondering, why am I going towards those in the first place? Make a plan that you have now 6 weeks, 7 weeks, multiple weekends that are there in that blessed month, that you use some of that time to reestablish this practice on a communal level for all of our benefits. But individually, you connect now to the prophetic tradition by introducing into your own life this practice of seclusion. And it's hard. There's countries in the world now, they have literally hired and established positions in their governments that are ministers of loneliness. That's not what we're talking about. You can't be afraid to be alone. You can't be afraid to deal with certain things and spaces by yourself. And in i'tikaf, you don't even have to do that. There's other people around you. But it's in those moments of solitude that ideas get cultivated, that creativity starts to become unbounded, that your courage, your boldness moves to a place where it's audacious and it becomes unbounded. And you're not just living the same routine that everybody else is living in a way where they're in these default robotic settings, and beauty is passing you day after day after day. In a communal sense of existence, your need for solitude is our benefit. Because when you capitalize on it, what it evolves now is your consciousness. Just like fasting, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. It's about a mindfulness rooted in an ethical imperative. You have a book, هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ, that is meant to be a guidance for those who have taqwa. So all of it is elevating that potential. So can you imagine if we started to come together as a community made up of individuals who were strong in their level of consciousness? Can you imagine that if our convenings were in a place where our inner selves were now in a place of reaching their potential high points? You are on the brink, the verge of really acquiring that thing that makes you distinct from the rest of creation. So when I sit and I talk to you, we are actually exchanging ideas because you've thought about things when you were by yourself. That the mode of our interaction was not simply rooted in things that we did a month ago and we don't even remember now. But I can be bold enough to turn to you and say that, hey, how do you think you and I together can build something that's going to leave this world in a place that's better than how it is that we found it? How do you think that we can aspire towards creating now something that's going to allow for those who get marginalized and isolated to not feel those things? You have talent, you have skills and credentials, you have networks and resources. You have so much in terms of spiritual gifts. What's missing is the ability to see it. And it's not just with a physical vision. It has to be with an inward vision that allows for you to do that. Where do you feel at rest? Where do you feel at peace? Where do you go to rejuvenate, to replenish? The spaces that take you out of the classrooms, the offices, where many convene with an intention that's just capitalistic about making money and teaching you how to make money. You got to put food on the plate. That's not what I'm saying. But if it's the only exposure and that's all that's there, conversations that are just about physical and the physicality and how you feed the physical, then why wouldn't you think the thoughts that you think? Taqwa is not just about being somebody who thinks, because everybody thinks. but it's about being able to reharness the gift, the skill that you choose how you think about the things that you're thinking about. And even before that, what it is that you're thinking about in the first place. You want to see people who have this as a practice. Somebody who is so built inwardly that they can actually believe and embrace the role of being a final prophet to all of mankind. You can't leave out of the recipe that made the Prophet ﷺ ready to accept that and introduce that as an idea to the whole world, the fact that he engaged in reflection and contemplation. If you're not doing it, you got to start doing it. And you do it deliberately, building it into your routine. Doesn't have to be for hours in a week. It doesn't even have to be hours in a day. You just sit 5 minutes, a few minutes, reflect upon something, exercise that mental muscle, use the cognitive organ that you have that is your heart. And it'll remove all kinds of veils and allow for you to have a clarity that as you start to taste it and experience it, you're not going to want to give it up for anybody. Where is that place that you can go? A place that would allow for you to be at peace with stillness. A place that would allow for you to engage and want to have solitude. A place where you're not afraid to address and confront your thoughts, but you can start to extrapolate meaning from them. This Ramadan, make a deliberate attempt that says, I'm going to engage in some of that for myself. You don't have to make it hard on yourself. You don't have to be in a place where you also put down somebody else's effort. Somebody tells you that I'm going to pray Isha for the first time in Jummah, tell them good job. Don't tell them, well, you also need to do this, this, and this. Somebody tells you that I have an exam tomorrow. Don't push them down and make them feel bad, but say that if I'm staying and you're going, I'm going to continue to make dua for you and know that Allah rewards you for the intention that you had, that you want to be here, but you can't. Uplifting words. Voices that allow for somebody to believe that they still are entitled to build that relationship with the divine. But at a minimum, on this day of Jummah, you start envisioning, what is that Ramadan going to look like for me? What are those nights going to look like for me? Nights where nobody is turned away. Nights where people of all races, all classes, nights where everyone comes, young and old, backgrounds of anything you can imagine. The only thing that they need for it to be something that yields what they're looking for is the presence of a wakeful heart. Nights where it is apparent beyond anything what it means that Allah is Kareem. They're not nights that you want to just leave to chance. And anything else that you think you could be doing in those nights, some that you might be compelled to do. But there will be moments, if you plan from now, that you can set aside and say, even if it's just an hour, even if it's just one of the days, I'm going to make sure that I seek some of that solitude. That I'm going to take advantage and reestablish this practice within a community. So that as an individual, I start to increase in that awareness, in my connection to my akal. And then as a community, I start to be a key building block of individuals that are elevated in their ideas, their creativity, their awareness. So we can go out and build for ourselves what we can't expect anybody else to build for us. but that missing ingredient is you more so than anybody. Take advantage of it while you have the time to do so. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروا إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله تعالى فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن سيدنا مولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله. As we get closer to Ramadan, as a community, we're going to continue to plan. Many of you are going to help us volunteer. May Allah reward you for that. There's going to be specific things that we start to ask of you, especially as students. For example, there's going to be many students who have classes still as commuters coming in at 8 a.m. in the morning, meaning they have to leave their homes at 5:30. So we're going to ask you, as a student population, who is willing to let their peers perhaps stay over for a night so that they can still benefit from Ramadan. If you have space, even on your floor, be the first to sign up. We're going to do a lot of programs that go till Fajr, some till 2 in the morning, different qiyams. You're going to have individuals who are going to go late at night, back and forth to different parts of the city. So when we reach out to say, who has a car that can help to drive people, or who is from what part of the city, so that you can go as a group and no one has to go by themselves in the late hours of the night, or decide to not go to something because they're worried if they're traveling alone, what might happen to them. Volunteer. The best of you are going to be those who, even where you don't have to get on a train to go somewhere else as a destination, you get on the train, you take somebody back to their home, and then you come back here. The Prophet ﷺ, Safiya radiallahu ta'ala anha, while he's in etikaf, comes to talk to him late at night. You're not supposed to technically leave the masjid. Once you enter for etikaf, she comes to ask him something, the hour is late. He leaves the masjid to walk her back to her house and then comes back to the masjid to resume his etikaf. There's purpose to this deen. But when those calls go out in the prism of the reality that we find ourselves in, don't wait for somebody else to sign up for something that you're able to do. But be the first one to say that, hey man, you can come stay at my place and you don't even have to stay on the floor, the couch. You take my bed, I'm going to sleep on the floor. You remember who your teacher is, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. You remember what it is that you really gain, not by seeing what it is that you have to give up, but where somebody else benefits from things that only you uniquely can do. Alhamdulillah, we're blessed to now start having some of our non-student community join. Technically, they were supposed to be coming from next week, but some of them got access today somehow. We don't know, but that's from Allah. So if you see new faces around you, greet them. The crux of this community is our student population. It's my opinion that the barakah of this space is just the beauty of the students that attend it. And we are blessed to have so many people who live in the outer boroughs in Manhattan that are able to leverage this space as their community space. And so in the coming weeks, you're going to start to see more of them attending. I think we have maybe a dozen or so with us today, alhamdulillah, and it's good to see your faces again after so long. And I want you all to talk to some of them when you can. One brother said to me that he's been waiting 2 years to be able to come back to this room. That's the kind of love people have for the space that we've been sitting in. And so many more when they found out that others were able to come today with like a good sense of envy, saying, I wish I could be there also. But we come together with a sole purpose of being connected to the divine. And you're going to see what it is that people can achieve when they come together on a good purpose, a good intention. But reach out to new faces just like you would reach out to anyone else and welcome them back or welcome them for the first time, so that when they meet you, you're the reason that they keep coming back and not ever the reason that they decide that it's not a space for them. We have some dua requests before we stand for prayer. Our sister Soraya, who many of you know, she's in our graduating class this year. Her grand uncle Muhammad Bari passed away recently, as well as our sister Hafiza. Her uncle Mansoor Qureshi passed away a few hours ago after a long battle with lupus. We make dua that Allah grants them both His infinite maghfirah, peace in the grave, and entrance into Jannah without any judgment. We had another brother, Muhammad Rauf Hussein, who passed away at the age of 47. He's the brother of Shanaz Hussein, a member of our community. Please keep them in your prayers as well. And we had many people who had reached out that we emailed about dealing with illness and difficulties of various kinds. Read those things, make dua for them. We make a collective prayer that Allah makes these ailments a means of purification in this world, a means of elevation in the next, and grants ease to them and all those who are in any state of distress at this time. Inna Allah wa malaikatahu yusalluna ala nabi ya ayyuha alladhina amanu sallu alayhi wa sallimu taslima. Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barik ala Sayyidina Muhammad fil awwalin wa fil akhirin. Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barik ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa barik wa sallama ya arhamar rahimin. اللهم إنك عفو كريم تحب العفو فاعف عنا يا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على دينك. اللهم اجعلنا من المخلصين. اللهم اجعلنا من المخلصين. اللهم اجعلنا من المخلصين. We begin this supplication in your name, Ya Allah, and beseech you to send your choicest salutations upon your most beloved, sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam. We ask that you shower your infinite mercy upon this gathering, granting each and every one who is present herein and our loved ones only the best in this world and the best in the next. We ask, Ya Allah, that if all of us are meant to be together only at this time, at this place, whether we are young or old, male or female, regardless of our race, our ethnicity, our social class, our country of origin, our cultural heritage, whether we are Muslim or come from a different walk of life, Ya Rabbi, if our individual hearts are meant to be in the presence of all of their hearts that are gathered here only at this time, at this place, then gather us all together again in the best of places in the world beyond this one. Increase us, Ya Allah, in all that is good. Increase us in courage, compassion, and confidence. Protect us from any affliction, anxiety, or anguish. Remove from our hearts any feelings of bitterness, jealousy, animosity, or envy towards any of your creation. Grant us hearts that are filled with understanding and hope, hearts that are truly drawn towards those things that are good and beautiful, hearts that find themselves deep in your remembrance. For indeed in your remembrance do hearts find rest. Make us from amongst those, Ya Rabbi, who reach and benefit from the coming month of Ramadan. Help each one of us to utilize these days of Sha'ban to the best of our ability, so that the people we are as individuals are able to meet that first day in the best state possible. Help us to find meaning in every success and achievement, as well as every mistake and failure. Throughout all of it, Ya Allah, make it a means through which we draw closer to you and gain recognition of the presence of your divine love and mercy. For these students who will be their first time being in a Ramadan here on campus, for our community members who are coming back and will be joining us as well, we ask Allah that for all of us and our loved ones, that you make it an experience that is uplifting and fulfilling, one that rejuvenates our hearts and replenishes parts of ourselves that we didn't even know were in need of rejuvenation. Make it a means through which we draw closer to you, Ya Rabbi. And throughout it all, help us to take advantage of every moment that comes to our way, leaving not any of it behind. Protect us always from hearts that are not humble, tongues that are not wise, and eyes that have forgotten how to cry. Forgive us for our shortcomings and guide and bless us all ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا يا مولانا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم وصلى الله تعالى على خير خلقه محمد وآله وصحبه أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين وأقيموا الصلاة.
If you would like to listen to more, please donate to www.icnyu.org/donate. For more of our virtual programs, go to www.icnyu.org/classes. If you have any questions, email us at info@icnyu.org.